Welcome to the Supported Living Property Podcast with your host, me, Lisa Brown, the place to learn about supported living property investing. Hi Sam, it's great to have you here today. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Very well, thanks. Back from holiday, so feeling chilled and back into the flow again.
Perfect. It's the best thing, isn't it, when you're back and relaxed and lovely. For people who don't know you, do you want to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about you?
Yeah, so my name's Sam Sly and I work for myself. I'm a social worker by background, and I've been a support provider in the past as well. But at the moment, and done other things, closed hospitals, all sorts of stuff like that. But, you know, very much along the lines of the people that you work with, you know, getting people into their own homes and supporting them. But at the moment, what I do, the majority of the work that I do is around planning with people, getting them out of hospitals, into their own home, and setting up the plan for what a support provider would need to put in place to support them. So they're often people with complicated lives who might need a bit of a bigger team and, you know, all those kind of things, really. So, yeah, that's what I do.
And I think, you know, we hear on the news every now and then, don't we? Someone gets to such a crisis point that they suddenly get to being focused on the news and people go, oh my gosh, this is terrible. There are people stuck in long-term hospitals and we need to change things. And then it goes quiet until another one breaks through the news, basically, from most people's perspective. Just to give a little bit of, you know, background to it, Sam, to help people understand, you know, there are a lot of people, aren't there, in this situation who are still in hospitals, in treatment centres.
Yeah, there is thousands of people still. And lots of people who have been there for a very long time. So, you know, these are people that there needs to be some real thought about what they need, you know, and sometimes people have been discharged, but it hasn't been done properly. The planning hasn't been done. So they haven't got the right housing, or, you know, they haven't had time to put a bespoke team, a team that really know the person well together, and then they just go back into hospital again. So, you know, the one thing that should be done is really good planning, and it should be done as soon as they go in hospital, if they have to go in there. I mean, they don't always have to. So, you know, some people we do planning for that just need a big move, do you know what I mean? Or they need to leave home or whatever, but they've just got a bit more complicated planning to do than some people who know where they want to go and can just get on with it, really. So, yeah.
And we're talking about people who have a sort of a diagnosis of a learning disability or autism,
or
principally,
autistic,
aren't we?
Yeah, definitely. Although, I mean, the planning that I do, like, you can do it with anybody. So, you know, I've done it with somebody who had locked-in syndrome, who's got their own home in the South Ham. So, do you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be, you don't have to have something. Do you know what I mean? You're just a person, really. But it's just very person-centered. That's what it is at the end of the day. So it isn't rocket science, it's person-centered planning, basically.
But I think it's one of those things that everyone assumes happens automatically, that it's just, this is a process that would be in place, and it isn't, is it? It's
not at all. No. Not at all. And, you know, you can imagine for commissioners and social workers, etc., who've got massive, great loads of lists of people that they're working with, they haven't got the time really to spend with somebody to really get to know what it is that they need. So there's still a traditional kind of way of working, I guess, where you just ring up the providers that you know, or you find out where there's a vacancy and try and slot people in. But of course, what we know from the people that we work with is that doesn't work a lot of the time, and it's quite an expensive thing to go wrong, really, if you get it wrong for somebody and don't do it properly. So,
and obviously the impact on that individual as well of having that experience of almost failing a discharge, I guess, you know, is horrible.
Totally. I mean, really, ironically, it probably costs more, you know, in what you've just said about the people coming off worse, but financially as well, getting it wrong, you know, because it doesn't help anybody. And I think sometimes we don't think enough about what we're doing to other people. So if you put somebody into somewhere that's not right for them, living with other people, then the other people are going to have a really bad time as well. But sometimes that doesn't seem to come into the equation, and it absolutely should do.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give it a little bit of context, people who are not familiar with this and are not sure why we're talking about why people end up in this situation, why are there thousands of people stuck in hospitals and treatment centres?
I think, I mean, I do planning with children and with adults, and I guess one of the things I would say is that we don't get it right enough when they're children. So, you know, already at that stage, we're not giving families the support that they need, and they either frazzle out and can't cope anymore, or, you know, children just don't get the right stuff then, and it just gets worse and worse. I work with quite a lot of older children, you know, young adults who, you know, I mean, one of the things I talk about with people is their life so far, just to try and learn what's gone right, but also what things we need to learn from. And they've not been supported well enough at those stages. So you're already on that kind of conjecture to go into a hospital by that stage, really. So yes, not getting it right.
Not getting it right to start with. And then the reason that people are then not discharged quickly, the reason that people stay there for a long time, why is that?
That's lack of housing, and more at the moment, a lack of, you know, support providers who can do that kind of, you know, really person-centered support, I suppose, really. And I know there's, you know, lots out there that want to do it, but you know, there doesn't seem to be enough doing those things, sadly, and they're not supported well enough, I guess, sometimes by the local teams either. Do you know what I mean?
What, the support providers themselves are not getting support.
I would say so, because it is, you know, you've got to have really good training, you've got to have really good support, and when things go wrong, you've got to have support from the professionals around you as well, so that it, you know, it doesn't end up going back with somebody going back in hospital again, which is the easiest route, really, sadly. I mean,
it's a
things
crisis
are changing.
response.
Yeah, it is. No,
yeah.
I was just going to say things, you know, they are slowly changing for the better. I wouldn't say, you know, things are getting worse. People are learning, but it's just such a slow process, you know, and these are people's lives at the end of the day, you know. I mean, a year or 2 years to us is probably nothing really, but for somebody that's been locked away and lost all of that time, you know, being with a family, having a life sort of thing, it's a heck of a long time. Very difficult then to come back out, you know, and blend back in again, really. But some people have been in for not 2 years, but 20 years, and that is just criminal, basically. Yeah.
And so obviously this is a property podcast, so we obviously need to look a little bit on the housing side of that, and what the you know, where that fits. So with the plans that you do, how would that work from a housing perspective?
So we do a kind of day. It's quite a lot of information that we collect together, and a big chunk of it is around home. So around what home looks like to somebody, and we do within that bit talk about all the different options that there may be. It's a facilitated process, though, therefore, although I've got a lot of experience in understanding about housing, what I'll do is pull out from people what their thoughts are, and my kind of you know, role as well is just to enable people to understand what options that there are that they may not know about as well. So we talk about all of that. We'll also do a kind of quite a detailed spec of what the house might need to look like, from whereabouts in the country right down to, you know, whether they need any adaptations or special things. I mean, they'll probably get another OT assessment nearer the time of finding the house, but you should have enough by the time we've done a plan to be able to go out and you know, and find a house for somebody. It's got that level of detail. But we also talk, because sometimes people don't know what the options are. So again, you know, going back to what I was saying about often the traditional way, it's living with other people, or it's whatever residential care home or whatever is available, and knowing that you can live on your own, or knowing that actually that's the best option for people. Because for some people, you know, their story very much tells you that there's no point putting them living with somebody else because it's not going to work. You know, and it's just going to fail. So, you know, I think the process gives you everybody a really clear idea of exactly what it is we're looking for somebody. And we'll talk about tenancies as well. And again, some people don't understand that might be part of the housing. Sometimes there's stuff around capacity that people haven't thought about, but we want to make sure that any actions that need to be done don't hold up somebody buying, you know, having a house bought for them. So things like who signs the tenancy or a mortgage if it's a shared ownership house, those kind of things need sorting out. And then we'll also talk about things like house rules. I know that sounds weird as well, but it's amazing, again, when you're talking through somebody's story, the things that have come up that have made it not work because staff have been doing things they didn't like, or they've not been treating it as if it was somebody's own home. So again, for the person to be thinking already about stuff that will make it bearable to have people coming in and out of their house, it's a really powerful thing to think about as well.
And I think that's really important, you know, isn't it, to focus on that for a second, because I think a lot of people assume we're talking about people who are used to having a big staff team around them and that would just be normal. But actually, for a lot of people, particularly if you've got the diagnoses we're talking about, that they can really difficult, aren't they, to manage those different people coming and going. So I really like that idea of having house rules, actually. I think, you know, as long as they're house rules in the right way round, if that makes sense. It's not that the individual needs to be in bed at 6:30 or whatever, you know, it's around them having the control of their house, because that's what it's about with supported living. It's their home first, isn't it?
Totally is. And you know, and I think that's learning for the staff as well, because I think sometimes, you know, we often have you know, recruit people that have worked in other places as well where it's different, and you know, and people share living space and all that kind of thing. So actually to remind people that this is somebody's home and you're not going to just be able to walk in and make yourself a cup of tea and all those kind of things, you know, and it's not because people are bad or anything like that. It's just not thoughtful, if you know what I mean. They don't think about it. But of course,
I think if you come from a clinical background, particularly, you're kind of thinking you would do if it was a hospital or a care home, aren't you? So it's having to reset the thinking around that, isn't it?
And then, you know, that's the thing about putting things on the walls as well, like, you know, posters of slips, trips and falls and all that kind of stuff, do you know what I mean? Which again, in some places is commonplace, but you don't have in your own home. And again, you've just got to kind of help people reset what they're thinking, you know, about things. But yeah, so that we do a bit of that, and it's quite nice to give that as an action for the person to go in and have a think about whilst they're, you know, whilst all the other things are happening, just so that they can see that, you know, it is going to progress and I am going to be moving at some point, which is, you know, what we all do. But of course, these things take a long time as well. So you've got to be, you know, people have to understand that, you know, it may take a while. But yeah, and, you know, we put them in touch with different organisations that might be able to take housing forward for them, because again, some local authorities and commissioners haven't got a clue what's out there or what the options are, especially if it's not something that's happening a lot in their area. So, you know, again, my kind of role is just to give them that information, but not to, you know, make the decision for them, really. So yeah, so housing's a big part of it all, you know, and sometimes people aren't even at that stage and they haven't got a clue what they want, do you know what I mean? But then the actions would then be to go away and find out more and go and see some places, talk to people that have already moved, that kind of thing, so that they can, you know, really understand it all. Because there is a hell of a lot of stuff out there for people, isn't there? But you just find it's quite narrow in some areas with the options that are available for people.
And obviously we've got an issue at the moment where property supply is really challenging, isn't it? Trying to get hold of property I think for anybody getting hold of property at the moment, whether you're privately renting or you're trying to get supported living properties, whatever, you know, what in your experience, what are you seeing that is working well, what's not working so well, what kind of
I mean, then there for a while there was grants for, do you know what I mean, you could get NHS England grants, so that was helpful. I mean, you know, and shared ownership is still something that people can go for, and at least that's a deposit amount of money rather than, you know, the whole. But you know, I have seen a lot of people go with, you know, investors and things like that. You know, I think there's a whole range. It's just getting that information out to people, isn't it really? I mean, I think people still have to go and be signed up for their social housing register, but I don't think there's quite as much you know, ability to get social housing as there was. So it's pretty much through, you know, providers who know housing, you know, landlords that can rent out to them and that kind of stuff, really. I see more of that going on now than we did before.
And people will have, listening to this, an image of the kind of property you're talking about. They'll have an image in their head, whatever it might be, of what they think a supported living home, maybe for someone with learning disabilities, would look like. What would you say, what in your experience is the kind of properties that people are looking for?
A range of them. So I mean, there is, you know, it's a normal house for a lot of people. I mean, you know, I was a support provider for many years, and we did learn lots of lessons of you know, at that stage, so it was probably about 10 years ago now, for everybody, we did go through social housing to start with, and we did get people housing. We had a really good relationship with the housing department, which was brilliant. However, it didn't always work. Do you know what I mean? So there are still a load of people that just need a normal house. Do you know what I mean? And no adaptations or anything like that. They just need somewhere where they know they're not going to be moved on. That's the main thing. But there are others. So, you know, I've done a plan just recently for somebody who's autistic, very noise sensitive, you know, needs to be able to walk in and out of their house, needs space, needs to be, you know, away from people because they make sounds all the time. So they would drive neighbours up the wall, sort of thing. But so they do need a pretty specific, probably expensive house. But then the flip side of that is this would be somebody that's their house for forever. Do you know what I mean? They're not going to need anywhere else. They're not going to want to move. So it's a, you know, once they've got that, that'll be what, you know, they won't need anything else really. But it's a range of things, to be quite honest. But, you know, I suppose the one thing for me is that generally the people that I work with, it isn't that often that they want to share with somebody else, or that they can share with somebody else. So I suppose it's because, you know, I get called in to do ones in complicated situations. But, you know, when you look through people's history, often it's being with other people that has caused them to get anxious and do the things that they've done. So, you know, the majority of people do need their own place. I mean, it may be their own place and somebody else has got their own place next door, but they need to be able to shut their front door, do you know what I mean, to have their own kind of area, you know, not living in a bedroom next door to somebody else or whatever, because it hasn't worked before.
And but some of the properties, you know, I know some of the property specs that I get sent through, you know, they're very complex properties. They're a lot of adaptations sometimes, and they're, like you say, quite expensive properties. We're often looking at a large detached bungalow in an area that's quite expensive anyway. And sometimes when I'm talking to property investors and people who aren't in this space, they're like, well, how does that work? That's going to be so expensive. Surely it's cheaper for people to stay in hospital.
No. Not at all.
No, and it isn't, is it, when they actually work it out? Actually,
not at all.
Yeah.
No. And, you know, I think the other thing that people don't think about or don't realize is that when somebody moves to somewhere that suits them, and, you know, and their anxieties go down and all those things, they actually don't need as much support. So, you know, you'll have ridiculous situations sometimes where, you know, people are saying they have to come out with 4 staff or 6 staff, or do you know what I mean? You think, well,
yeah, I've seen that recently on a housing spec.
What the hell are all these people going to do? But, you know, we used to bite our tongue when these, you know, and say, yeah, that's fine, and go about the business. But knowing that when you get something right for somebody, so you get the right housing, and then you employ a team for them, do you know what I mean? That you can train around them, that match their personalities, that know them inside out, you know, that are well supported, the numbers of people that you need involved go down dramatically, you know, because they don't need people, or you use other things, you know, you use assistive technology, or, you know, other ways of supporting somebody when they're anxious, you know, taking them away for you know, a breakaway instead of bringing in another person, that kind of stuff. So so yeah, I think getting the house right and getting the team right for somebody is the, you know, the answer to getting it all right and reducing the costs. And of course that's what commissioners always want at the end of the day, don't they? As well as getting a good life for people. But yeah, definitely where somebody lives makes all the difference.
It does for all of us, doesn't it? Our home is crucial. It's so important.
Totally is.
It really is important, and getting that right from the beginning. And so your process would be, actually, once someone is admitted to hospital, almost right from the beginning, to be starting this planning for their discharge.
That's what I would like to happen. It rarely does. And usually what you do is get brought in when you know, everybody's getting at each other because nothing's happened and somebody's, you know, or somebody's got a delayed discharge, or the media's got involved, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It's those kind of situations, which is sad, because if it had been done at the right time, you know, or if this was part of, and I don't mean me doing it, but just that we all, you know, thought about, you know, people moving out as soon as they went in, then that would be brilliant. I mean, the plans that I do they're not a one-off anyway. They're meant to be something that evolves and develops with the person. So an example, I support a family down in Cornwall whose son has got his own, it's a shared ownership house down there, and his mum runs his team through an individual budget. And we did his first life plan 7 years ago, and it's still every year. So the team, it's part of what they understand is the support for him. So every year we review it, and we'll look at whether his housing is still as it should be. Is there anything we need to do about that? I mean, he's got a long-term plan to move to Penzance. That would be his dream. Don't know why, we can't quite work out, because he's in a quite nice place already, but that's what he wants to do. So that's still on the cards. But, you know, things like, are the numbers right in his team? Do we need, you know, different people when we do next recruitment? What kind of training do they need for the year? And we also do review his goals. So what are the team aiming to do with him for next year? What are the things he'd like to achieve? So he's just been on holiday, actually, on a plane, which he's really wanted to do. And he walks the coastal path and swims in the sea. And so it's all stuff like that, trying to, you know, to keep things going. But it becomes part of life rather than it being a one-off thing that goes on the shelf and nothing happens to it, basically.
Which makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense that it should be something that, you know, and again, people listening may assume that's something that happens all the time, and it's about these individuals having their own voice, isn't it, and control over their own life. And yeah,
definitely. So, and it's lovely to see it when it does work like that, because, you know, it's also extremely sad when people have invested a lot of time and energy into putting together a plan, and then nothing happens with it because it's been done because somebody's had pressure put on them to do it. Do you know what I mean? And you just kind of know them. But I guess the other bit I get out of it is that the process helps people, because it's a way of planning where the person and the family are very much at the centre of it all, which they're not that often, to be quite honest. However much we talk about listening to people and co-production and all the words that are used, it isn't usually there. So, you know, this process is very much like that, and professionals sometimes feel a bit uncomfortable because it's them telling us what they want, you know, the family and the person themselves. So it kind of changes people a bit, you know, and they have to sit and listen to the person telling us about what's happened to them, and the family also, you know, and actually hearing it instead of reading, you know, a paragraph about whatever's in the file written about them, has quite a big impact on people. But I think also it opens people's eyes up, as I was saying earlier, to, well, actually there is more housing than what we're being told, or housing options. And, you know, we can be involved in picking our staff that work with us. We don't have to, you know, go with a provider just telling us, well, you're just going to have Steve because he's the only person we've got, sort of thing. So it kind of empowers people a bit, I think, to know that there's a bit more to it, you know, than they think, hopefully.
And obviously we hear stories, I hear them quite a lot, of people who have been discharged, and perhaps this process hasn't been followed, or perhaps it hasn't, it's gone wrong, or, you know, things happen, and people end up living in properties that aren't right for them. You know, I've got a situation at the moment where they're desperately trying to find a new home for someone who's been moved into a terraced property. He makes quite a lot of noise. The neighbours are mounting a bit of a hate campaign. You know, it's not working at all. And when you look at it from where the conversations I'm having, you're kind of, well, how did we get to that point where actually he's been was placed there, when to me that seems like that shouldn't have happened in the first place. Do you see that happen a lot?
Yeah, a lot. And, you know, I think there's often in the person's story, when you're talking to them, there will be a number of times that those things have happened, and that's why they bounce back into a hospital again, because there isn't anywhere else. Do you know what I mean? That's there is no options then, which is awful, absolutely awful. So yeah, definitely. So it means you've got to get it right. I mean, you know, I say all that, but as a provider, we got it wrong because sometimes I suppose you can't always know, you can only know that person as much as you can at that point. Do you know what I mean? And some people that have been in hospital, they've not lived outside, you know, in the community, in their own place for so long that actually when they do move, there may be things that bubble up that you're not aware of. However, if you've got a team around them that's flexible and can adapt, and do you know what I mean, and is well supported, it still shouldn't result in them going back in a hospital. You should be able to, you know, put enough together, put your minds together to get things right. But at the end of the day, sometimes the house isn't right, but it's not that often, to be quite honest. Yeah, and you just have to look again. But yeah, I think noise is one of those things, isn't it, really? And
noise and neighbours, I think, are the two things, aren't they? Even if someone potentially isn't noisy, I think potentially if you get the wrong neighbours who are gonna.
But saying that, I mean, that's another area that we talk about in the planning day, and that's around, so how are we going to prepare for getting on with the neighbours? So, you know, there are lots of things you can do. I mean, when we used to move people out of hospital, we would, I mean, you have to get the house ready anyway, so you've got people coming in and out of there even before the person's there, haven't you? So, you know, what the team leaders, one of their roles was to start to chat to neighbours, do you know what I mean, and be friendly and be helpful and all those things. And then we would plan for what we're going to do to be helpful to the neighbours, do you know what I mean, when the person comes, you know, and have an agreement about what you're going to share. And again, that can be quite contentious, can't it, because you don't want to share information with people that you don't have to. However, it might be better to know, for them to know that the person might be, you know, noisy at times, or you know, that some of the noise is because they're really happy. Do you know what I mean? That kind of stuff. You've just really got to think about these things, because we can't place everybody in a field on their own, and it wouldn't be right for people.
No.
but equally, we can't expect Neighbours to have, first of all, millions of people moving into this new house, and you think it, and then this person that nobody's told them anything about, they're going to make up all sorts of things in their heads, aren't they, about who they are, and therefore you've already got problems before they've even moved in. So it's well worth having a think as a provider about what you're going to do, you know, and how you can help. So you know, one of the things that's really important to think about is boosting the person in the community, so getting them to be seen as a positive contributor. So we always look again in the planning at what they're good at, what things they enjoy doing. Is there community groups that they could get involved in, or could they, I don't know, do something, go and feed the neighbours' cats, or you know, go and pick up litter or anything like that, to kind of help them to be seen in a different way than just somebody with a learning disability, or you know, something that's more of a, feels more negative.
I think that's really important, and certainly you know, having worked alongside lots of different providers with this, like, you can see where the good practice is, and where the, you know, the providers who, like you say, have someone fairly senior within the team who works on as the neighbour negotiator almost, and does that. And you know, as a property investor, I've always shared with neighbours, well, this is my contact details if you're having problems, and you know, you'll have a contact within the staff team, but if you've got any problems, then contact me too, you know. And people have, you know, being just, that's always worked really well, I think, as well.
But just that, I mean, the guy that I work with down in Cornwall, and he's not able to talk, and you know, I mean, and he, you know, he's autistic, but his neighbour, what we just make sure is that he will do little things. Do you know what I mean? So when he's mowing his lawn, we'll say, you know, would you like him to mow your lawn as well? He loves mowing, and do you know what I mean? Over the years, they've made an amazing relationship just by tiny little things, you know what I mean, little bits and bobs, but just being thoughtful about, this is really important that they get on, do you know what I mean? And also things like, again, going back to housing and stuff, if you've got a big team, you've got people with cars, and one of the things that drives them up the bloody wall is, you know, parking all over people's streets.
That's been such a common complaint from neighbours.
It is, but again, in the housing spec, so it's really, you know, we'll put that in about, if there's, you know, if it's a team of quite a few, that there needs to be parking somewhere, because that's often missed, and it's, you know, it's, well, it kills it, doesn't it, really?
It really can do. And once you've got that damaged relationship, it's much harder to try and bring it around, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we had one person, again, this was a long time ago now, but we had exactly that, where the neighbours started to do a petition and that, and what the team leader did there was go around individually to talk to them all. And what we found out from that was that actually there was only 2 people on the whole close who felt really strongly. The others just couldn't say no to. Do you know what I mean? So we kind of built up better relationships with all the others, and it kind of fizzled out, thank goodness. But you've got to be bold, and you know, we expect a lot from support teams, don't we?
We do,
you know, sometimes too much, but you know, but it's the work you have to do, because you're the voice for somebody, you know, and you're their advocate at the end of the day. But it's also really, you know, really interesting and really amazing work. But
and such important work when it's done right. It has such great impact, doesn't it? So important.
Definitely.
Sam, thank you for sharing so much really useful information for people. We'll put your contact details in the show notes so people can get hold of you there if they need to. So thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Lisa. Bye.
Bye.